Hello and welcome. I'm going to be talking about how to break through the barriers into the shadow based on a previous video that I uploaded, a previous episode that I uploaded. So I talked about in my previous episode the barriers to shadow work. What are the most common barriers that we can find ourselves grappling with that will prevent us from exploring our unconscious self, that will prevent us from exploring our shadow self? And in this video, I'm going to talk about how to work through the barriers, how to identify that the barriers are there. So first, as a little bit of a recap, I do suggest if you haven't watched the previous episode, I would suggest to watch it. I will leave a link here to understand what the shadow is, what the unconscious is, and what are some of the common barriers, what we can experience when going into the shadow. Because when we go into the shadow, or the unconscious self, I should say, first of all, we will naturally create a fragmentation. We will naturally create disruption. We will naturally create splintering, if you will, where we will become very confused about our life. We will become very confused about who we are. But that begins the process of unraveling from all the false programs and beliefs and experiences that we have embedded deep within ourselves, so that we can return more to who we are, to our truth, and to our depth within. So it's a byproduct of society. It's a byproduct of how we were raised. It's a byproduct of many different factors. But in this work, you will definitely begin the process or deepen your practice to understand more of who you are and what is getting in the way of you being all that you want to be, of having the life you truly want, but living a life of fulfillment and peace and happiness, because it is definitely possible, especially for those who have gone through the most difficult times and have given up and felt like nothing can change. Guess what? It can all change and heal. You are the full creator of your reality, of every aspect of your life. You can change your body, you can change your mindset, you can change everything about you. And this is the most important aspect of this type of work, is understanding our shadow and our unconscious self. So just as a very, very light recap, what is our unconscious? Our unconscious self is an aspect of ourself that basically can operate our functioning, our thoughts, our emotions, even our physical manifestations without our awareness. And even very aware people have an unconscious self. When we go into the unconscious, we can tap into our dreams, we can explore our dreams, we can explore our unconscious behavioral patterns, we can explore our false beliefs, which I will get to in a moment, and we will also be able to understand our whole self. So when we have the barrier that has been formed throughout our life, this is a byproduct, again, of society, of our upbringing. When we have the barrier formed between the conscious level of awareness and the unconscious self, a thick barrier will form, preventing us from seeing into the unconscious or even venturing in. And some of the common behavioral patterns or attributes for not wanting to go into the unconscious or having a very serious barrier formed will be avoidance, will be resistance, will be saying no, will be making up stories to even make fun of the process. Anything that creates a barrier to actually being open to looking within ourselves. And it can be scary at first. It can be daunting. It can be overwhelming of, well, where do I even start with this? What's even under the surface? Especially if we're used to suppressing, especially if we're used to numbing, especially if we're used to avoiding, it will require a whole different way of being. And that can be scary. That can create a lot of unease within oneself to be open to explore a different aspect of self. So the barrier will create unconscious responses of avoidance, of excuses, of making up stories, of, again, maybe even thinking it's stupid or not worth my time, or opting out for what has felt familiar, patterns, addictive behavior, avoidance, numbing, suppressing, etc. But when we are in the behavioral patterns of suppressing and numbing and avoiding, we are going to perpetuate these underlying aspects of ourselves that need to be faced. Otherwise, we will get sick. We will become very sick. It will affect us, our psychology. It will affect our emotional well-being. It will affect our body, and it will definitely affect our behaviors and our perception of how we see reality. And I've gone through all of this. My perception of reality has shifted so many times. And so many times I have looked back at how I was looking and perceiving life and certain situations and relationships, for that matter, through the lens of criticism, through the lens of judgmentalness, through the lens of fear, through the lens of shame, through the lens of guilt. And I'm also going to go into the 7 aspects that Dr. Michael Lincoln has highlighted, because I actually feel that he has created a very clean and clear depiction of 7 difficulties that we tend to fall under within ourselves, or that we tend to experience. Now, we can experience all of them because we're human. We can definitely relate to many of them, which I'll go into in a moment. But first, I'm going to talk about this barrier that we have formed within ourselves and the symptoms that we can find unconsciously perpetuating that prevent us from going within. Now, also too, I have to mention, when we start to go into our unconscious, when we start to venture into it, it is going to shift our perception. So you have to be also very open to looking at life differently, to looking at yourself differently, to looking at your relationships differently. When we are looking at life through our heart, when we are connecting with our heart, when we are connecting with our soul, there is no criticism, there is no judgmentalness, there is no shame, there is no guilt, there's no fear, and there's no grief. And we can rid ourselves of these unconscious barriers that we have, or patterns that we have within ourselves, false beliefs, and rise to a more authentic state of being, a more evolved and a place based on unconditional love within ourselves. We rise above the false beliefs that have been ingrained within our unconscious. And you can almost think of your unconscious as a supercomputer within yourself, a biocomputer. And within that biocomputer are programs. There are programs that have been ingrained since our formative years. And if you want to go into past life, yes, you do carry some through incarnation. And then we live by those patterns. We tend to look at life and we form stories based on those patterns, based on those false beliefs. And false beliefs are not your true beliefs, even though we feel them to be true because we're used to them. Our true beliefs are in accordance with our highest good and greatest potential, our soul's full absolute purpose and potential and purity. And when we are in aligned with our purity, we rise above all this. We rise above and we create a very, very powerful relationship with our unconscious. We're able to understand our psyche. We're able to understand our archetypes within ourselves. We're able to understand our patterns, our beliefs, etc. So this work is very, very powerful. But again, there will be resistance to going in. So first, it is also going to be important to give yourself time through this process, as it is a learn as you go. It is a very introspective practice. It is very internalized, and awareness is going to be key. So one of the exercises to working through the barriers is self-awareness, observing what you are saying, observing how you are reacting to certain situations, observing your behaviors, your thoughts, your emotions, anything that is from a place of fear. And I'll go through all the 7 attributes: fear, shame, criticism, guilt, grief, anger, and resentment. Those are the 7. And I will work on each one of those separately in this video. All of those 7 attributes that we have within ourselves create some kind of behavioral response, and it becomes justified because we are used to functioning that way. We're used to acting that way. We're used to looking at the world through a certain lens based on those difficulties that we have within ourselves, based on those difficulties that we have programmed within our shadow. And I also should mention, our shadow also holds our light. I've mentioned this before, but it also holds our true self, our gifts, and our talents. We can suppress our true self into our shadow. And what might come up instead of it could be anger, could be fear, right? There could be a different type of persona that has developed in place of our true self. We may develop a persona unconsciously that may be someone very strong and resilient, or maybe someone very happy and pleasing and giving and caring, but it may not feel right within us. We may be acting in a way that we've been used to acting, but it may not necessarily be our truth. And how we can identify that it's not our truth is there will be heaviness within our body. We may not feel 100% pure and light and vibrant and in flow with life itself and with relationships and with ourselves. Our body will also be cranky. Our body will definitely talk to us. We can develop diseases, aches, and pains within our body when we are not in alignment within ourselves. And that is at the origin of a lot of diseases, aches, and pains, and ailments within our body. So the barrier of going into the unconscious is going to be one that you will be able to work on on your own, but only you will be able to understand what it is, because you are unique, you are different, and it is 100% an internal experience. You have to go through the layers one by one by one, observing, again, behaviors, observing projections. Projections are when we have a quick reaction to something. We feel that something isn't right. We feel that someone is wrong. We feel that the world is flawed. We look at the negative in life, or we may project anger or resentment or criticism towards others. Now, that comes from the unconscious. And we justify it. We make up a story. We feel that we have a right to feel that way. We feel that we have a right to act a certain way, or think a certain way, or behave a certain way, right? And it does take, again, a lot of observation, but through compassion and care, being very, very gentle and giving yourself grace to observe. Right? We are human. And like I said, I've gone through all of this. I used to not be such a great person because of these false beliefs that I had within myself. I was operating mostly, a lot, I would say, out of my shadow. And a lot of it, I would say the majority, was fear. But it definitely created actions of criticism or behaviors of criticism. It created definitely a lot of symptoms within my psychology, within my psyche. It was very difficult to work through. So give yourself time when you are working through this process. Give yourself grace when you're working through this process. Be gentle with yourself, and do not be hard on yourself if you slip, if you say something bad to someone, if you do something that you are ashamed of, because shame is part of this as well. Just observe, simple observation. And if something is done, if something is said, apologize, make amends. Done. It's that simple, right? And when we acknowledge it within ourselves, and when we can find peace within ourselves, with our actions, with our unconscious behaviors, we will also help the process of releasing and healing these underlying unconscious patterns and beliefs within ourselves, right? So the barriers, the working through the barriers, I'm going to actually walk through all the different 7 challenges that I just mentioned. I'm going to start with anger first, and I'm going to walk through all of the 7 challenges and how you can work through the barriers to understand the origin of these 7 challenges. This video is a little bit difficult to do because we all have our unique experience. We all have our unique blueprint, and it is a bit general. So take what resonates, and also you can alter what I say that fits your unique experience and your unique self. Anger is going to be the first one. So when anger is coming in from our unconscious self, I truly believe that anger is one of the origins for anger. I would say probably the main reason for anger would come from when we have not been able to live to our full potential, or be who we want to be, or be all that we want to be. So it's coming from a very suppressed aspect of ourself, where we are almost encaged in within our shadow, where we have suppressed our true light, where we have suppressed our potential, and when we are not able to live freely and express ourselves freely and allow our soul to thrive at its optimal potential. So when we are angry, and anger is a very common symptom coming from our unconscious self in society. We can go out on the streets and we can see people being angry unconsciously. We can find ourselves becoming angry. Now, anger it can come from past life. If you subscribe to past life, it can come from healing generational trauma. It can come from many deep, deep, deep wounds that we have within ourselves energetically. But also, I feel that at the origin of it all, it is a suppression of our soul's potential. So when our soul has arrived in its full potential, in unconditional love, working in union with our body, with our mind, with our emotional self, when we are in flow and whole within ourselves, we will not be angry, because we are thriving to our optimal potential, and we will be able to rise above situations with ease. Now, it doesn't mean that anger may not show up. It might, but the closer and closer that we become with our whole self, the less we will become angry, the less we will be any of these 7 different traits within ourselves. We will not succumb to these 7 traits as frequently or as easily as if we are fragmented or operating out of our unconscious or our shadow. So some of the steps for working through the barrier of anger in the unconscious is going to be, again, self-awareness and paying attention to when your energy is starting to percolate, when it's starting to become very fueled in a situation. Now, if you have an erratic response to something and you all of a sudden lash out at a certain person or even within yourself, be very aware of it and try to let it go through, again, self-awareness and finding the origin of why am I truly angry? Because we can, when we get triggered, we can point the finger at someone else. And this goes into trigger video I've talked about. When we become angry at someone else's actions or at life or even at ourselves, we are projecting something deeper, a deeper false belief from within. All right. So according to the work of Dr. Michael Lincoln, he described anger as a moment when we are, or a moment or an experience or an expression when we are not able to overcome a challenge or work through a barrier. So again, it's almost a feeling of being confined or restricted in some kind of way. So even if someone comes into our space, they could be activating or triggering something that might make us feel like our boundaries are becoming crossed. It may feel that we are trapped. It may feel that we are stuck. There are many actual occurrences that I have gone through, even becoming angry at life itself, not being able to get ahead, not being where I want to be. So that is also a form of feeling stuck and trapped in a very confined place in life, or a very confined space in reality. The majority of your difficulties that you are going to experience in this lifetime, the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them are going to come from early formative years. How your parents acted, picking up patterns from your family, how you were treated. If you were treated in a way of not being able to rise to your full potential or feeling supported in your environment, that can also perpetuate anger. So you have to go back and sometimes most often, look at the patterns from your past of what you experienced, how you were treated, some of the patterns and beliefs that you took on from your family, and it will help you work through the barriers. So we need to look at ourselves in a different light and in a different way to understand our actions, our reactions, our behaviors, and the false beliefs, connecting the dots with the past. And that's going to be a huge one. So we need to create a new perception on how we are seeing reality, how we are acting, how we are seeing ourselves. And this is almost an exercise of almost removing ourselves from our body and from our situation in a way, to look at ourselves and look at our life situation through a bird's eye view, through a new perspective, and through a perspective of unconditional love. Now, our ego is going to get in the way and form stories. Well, how dare that person say this to me? How dare that person cut me off? How dare that person do this to me? How dare that person run the country that way? Because we're seeing this happen. People are working and operating very, very much in their unconscious or by their unconscious self, very much in anger. And so when we start to look at life differently through a different perspective, we then start to see more. We start to broaden our landscape of our perception and alter our reality based on seeing life in a new way. We also begin to distance ourselves from the relationship that becomes very entangled with those false beliefs and with the reaction, in this case, is going to be anger. So we start to distance ourselves and look at life, and we are able to then catch it quicker and quicker as it moves along. So when anger comes in, we'll be able to stop ourselves easier. Most times. I still deal with anger as my go-to. We will then be able to distance ourselves and look at our situation through a different perspective. And it happens faster when you observe yourself. So awareness heals. This is the work of Dr. Michael Lincoln. Awareness always heals. And so doing this work, when you go into the unconscious, when you start to pay attention to your patterns, to your behaviors, to your psyche, for example, tuning in with your intuition, paying attention to the body, connecting the dots with these things, then you are going to be able to open up new levels of consciousness. You are going to increase your levels of awareness and become more aware. So the difficulty of anger is going to be seen quicker. You're going to observe yourself from a different perspective. You're going to look at your life, your situation from a different perspective. And it's an ongoing process. You chip away at it and chip away at it and chip away at it, and you'll be able to see it through a new lens. And as soon as you see something through a new perspective, as soon as you gain an understanding, as soon as you know, okay, this is something I have to work on. It's not necessarily those people and whatever is happening in our life are actors on our stage, and they teach us something deeper about ourselves every time. And I'll tell you, my ego never liked that. I had the hardest time actually differentiating, or I would say removing myself from my ego story of that person's a jerk, that person is rude, I can't believe that person treated me this way. And those stories perpetuate, and we become very locked in with those stories, but that's not the truth. And that doesn't help us look within ourselves so we can address the root cause and let it go, so that in the future we are not affected by those types of behaviors, and we can rise above it because we know the full story and we're able to see it through a new perspective. So the next one is going to be criticism. So one of the barriers for this one actually is quite good because we come from a society, our history has been riddled with control, criticism, right or wrong, making sure that we are doing things right. Now, this comes from formative experiences of wrong making, being wrong made as a child. So being told that we're constantly doing things wrong, that we're wrong, we get punished more than actually rewarded. I mean, at least in my childhood, it was more punishment than anything, but that was the nature of the timeline that we've been in. Now we're moving our way out of it. And this exercise, all of this is an exercise of witnessing these patterns so that we can let them go, so that we can remove ourselves from these patterns. So criticism comes in a very rigid format. In our body, it also manifests as arthritis, as stiff joints. And criticism can be self-criticism towards ourselves, where we are very hard on ourselves, or where we are very hard on others or on the world. And again, when we are used to functioning in this unconscious behavior, we will then create a story and justify our reactions. And so the world is full of criticism. I have lived in it myself for a long time. And it is very easy to look at what's wrong with the world. It happens everywhere in our society, right? And we can also be very critical towards ourselves, especially. So it is a projection outward. It is something internalized. So in the unconscious, there will be a persona that we have built because of this functioning that will tell us that we are right in our critical behavior or functioning when we are critical towards others, towards the world, or even towards ourselves. And it creates a very, very, very solid and hard layer that's very difficult to break through actually with this one, because you can think of the energy even of criticism. It's very rigid. It's very locked in. It's very fixed, right? And so we can find ourselves very rigidly fixated in the act of, or in the belief of criticism, that the world is wrong, that this person is wrong. And again, it comes from childhood, it comes from our history, it comes from beyond, right? And so criticism will create a very strong barrier to break through, and it will require a lot of patience to work through this. And if you catch yourself criticizing someone else, or being critical, or even being hard on yourself, just be aware of the behavior, of the pattern, of the intensity of it, and try to create distance from it. And maybe try to look at it through a new lens. When we become very critical, we're also missing a lot of information, because we become very focused on what is wrong. And when we're focused on what is wrong, it does create a very strong barrier into levels of consciousness, but even looking at situations through different perspectives. And so we can become very rigidly fixated on, again, what is wrong, or what we think is wrong, or what's right. But then we're not allowing ourselves to look at different perspectives. We're not allowing ourselves to gain new understanding of a broader subject, a broader situation. So this one's going to require letting go. This one's going to require, again, of course, all of these self-observation, self-awareness, and tuning in with your heart and your intuition of what feels right from your heart. Criticism is going to come from here. It's going to come from the mind. It's going to come from our false belief system that we have within ourselves, where we feel that we are justified to be critical towards someone or towards ourselves. The next one is going to be resentment. And according to the work of Dr. Michael Lincoln, resentment can lead to cancer. When we are holding on to injustices or indignities of the past or current, but mostly they go old if we are starting to get sick within ourselves, if we are starting to develop sicknesses. This can lead us into past life. It can lead us into this life of situations that we have gone through that have left a mark within our deeper self, that we can hold on to these stories. And these stories that we hold on to can be also suppressed, where we might not even notice how much we are holding on to stories of the past and onto resentment until we actually go into our unconscious, until we really notice what is under the surface. Now, resentment, I feel, is very under the surface. It can be very surface, where we can find ourselves ruminating over the past or holding on to a story or even a regret of a certain situation, a person, a relationship, what's happened maybe in our family, for example. But when we live in the past and we're holding on to it, it's a very emotional connection. This one is very deep, and it can go very much into very, very deep into our unconscious self. Again, if we can suppress it, or if we suppress it, then it will be buried and shoved right down into the depths of ourselves. And so it's very important with this one to watch where there is resentment, and resentment can be so under the surface that a trigger moment may arise where we may find ourselves in a interaction with someone, and all of a sudden we may react very intensely towards this one particular person. Now, that intensity, it doesn't have to be necessarily anger. It could go into anger, but it's going to come from somewhere deep. It's going to come from an unresolved maybe story from our family, from a parent, from maybe a past relationship. It can run very deep with this one. So the barrier to navigating this one is going to be understanding the depths of yourself. It's going to require you to go into your heart. It's going to require you to make amends with the past. It's going to require you to forgive and notice all the layers and levels that are connected with stories of the past, right? So this one is going to require deep work, forgiveness, healing the heart, making amends, unconditional love, right? So the barrier with this one is going to be intense, it's going to be deep, it's going to be emotional. And our emotions are very, very, very strong. We can hold on to emotional difficulties and traumas and resentment in very unconscious ways. So if you find yourself even maybe out for a walk or working, and then all of a sudden you're hit with a memory, or you're hit with anger, you're hit with an emotion from the past, or maybe something your parent did or someone else did to you that left a mark, catch it, be very aware and let it go. Forgive that person, forgive yourself. How can you make amends and find peace within the situation so you can set yourself free? The next one I'm going to go into is shame. Now, shame also is a very, very deep, similar to resentment. It runs deep. It runs deep, deep, deep within ourselves. It can create a lot of resistance to showing the world our true self. If we had gone through traumas and difficulties in the past, we may feel that we are fundamentally flawed. We may feel that we are not good enough. And this one also requires a lot of deep work. And there can be a very, very strong barrier between the conscious and the unconscious self. We can create a persona in our outer reality to show up perfect, or to show up like we are not flawed, or to show up that we are good enough. Can hold our persona so strong in our outer world and create a picture and interact with people based on how we feel we should be, while on the inside, we're trying so hard to maintain that story and to show up that way, that it creates a very strong conflict with our inner self. And it creates a lot of anxiety and fatigue, because it can require a lot of energy and attention to how we are acting and behaving in our outer world, when we are not allowing ourselves to be who we are, and we're not allowing ourselves to be in flow. So we are creating a barrier. We are creating a persona with this one. We are also hiding who we are, because we feel that we are not enough. We feel that we are not good enough, right? So this one can run very, very, very deep within ourselves. And it is going to require inner introspection and an inner discovery on how good we feel about ourselves. And if there's a feeling of low worth, if there's a feeling of I am not good enough, then it's going to require them to work on self-worth, feeling that they are perfect as they are, with the flaws, with the imperfections, with the stories of the past, feeling into the feeling that I am good enough. I accept myself, and I accept who I am and my story of the past. And the story does not define who I am today. Even though it can feel that, and even though we can carry the stories and the difficulties from the past and have it weigh on us heavily, when we accept ourselves, when we accept our stories, when we accept our flaws, and when we embrace our full self and start to arrive into I am enough and I am good enough, the weight will lift. But this requires a lot of self-awareness, and especially understanding what has happened in the past does not define you, and it does not need to be carried through with who you are today and how you are functioning in your present moment. And so when we realize that our stories from the past are experiences, when we can start to let go of the entanglement of these stories and of the stories that we tell ourselves and how we show up to maybe again be perfect or acceptable in our outer world when we don't accept ourselves on our inner world, we will be able to cultivate a healthier and closer relationship with ourselves, therefore lifting the energy off of us so that we can be more of our authentic self. So when we have accepted ourselves, when we have returned to our wholeness, when we have accepted our flaws and our stories of the past and come to terms and maybe forgave and healed the past and worked on more of our self acceptance within, we are going to become more whole, and we are going to lift a lot of energy off of us. We consume a lot of energy. We carry the burdens of energetic weight when we are trying to be someone, when we are trying to show up perfect, or when we are trying to show up in a way that we feel will be acceptable, while on the inside we are again hiding something that we don't want other people to see, or it can be very unconscious where we have suppressed that altogether. So it may require quite a lot of inner work of self-acceptance, self-love, accepting past situations and past stories, coming to terms, maybe forgiving the past or forgiving self, and working on creating a great, beautiful, harmonious relationship with self. So the next one is going to be guilt, and guilt stems from shame. Guilt is I am not doing enough, or I am not doing it well enough. So guilt comes from when we feel like we are not doing enough, when we're not being there enough for others, when we are not overextending ourselves enough. It feels like we are maybe even not doing things right. And so we can carry these feelings of guilt if we feel that we are doing something wrong, right? If we haven't done something right. And this comes again from how we've been raised. It comes from society. So the barrier is going to be very difficult in, again, radical self-acceptance with what we are doing and who we are. So it's going to require us to be okay with what we do or what we don't do. And it's also going to be, in this particular case, very important to establish boundaries. This one is very important for boundary work, our internal boundary of the boundaries, maybe emotional boundaries, maybe physical boundaries with other people, of how we feel about ourselves when we are imbalanced within ourselves. Then implementing boundaries within our inner self, but also again within our outer environment. Boundaries can also apply to our beliefs and to our values, and staying true to that. And no matter what we do, accepting our flaws, or accepting maybe a slip or a little bit of a reaction to life, or maybe not showing up and helping people the way that we used to, in order to maybe spend more time by ourselves and take care of ourselves and not feeling guilty doing that. And as soon as guilt shows up, let it go and return into self-worth. So we need to also arrive at a place with this one with self-acceptance and in our inner knowing and conviction of our beliefs, our values, and our boundaries, and our self-worth. The next one is going to be grief. Grief comes in as sadness. It comes in as holding on to maybe a person, maybe even if someone has moved on, left our life, maybe a passing on, or even any kind of relationship separation. There could be a lot of grief that may arise during this. And this is sadness. It's sadness. It's when sadness can come in and take over. It also can come in when we feel like we need to carry the weight of the world, feeling sad for the world, feeling sad for others. And so there's an unresolved emotional attachment within self that will need to be addressed. So I do have to preface also, I think touched on it earlier on, but I do want to mention it again. If I already mentioned it, then I might be repeating myself. It is very important to remember that when you are pure, When you are in your soul's, your full potential, your human potential, your soul potential, your everything potential, when you are living in unconditional love, there is an acceptance of the cosmic order of life, and there's an acceptance of eternal life. It's when we are able to understand that life is eternal, that we are beyond the attachments, that we are beyond the attachment to the physical realm, that our relationships, they are eternal, and we are part of this cosmic story that is so much greater than we realize when we are attached to situations, to people, and to 3D, right? When we are attached to a denser experience of attachments, materialism, relationships. And it doesn't mean that we can't grieve, which I feel there's beauty to that. And I feel that it is beautiful to grieve, and we are emotional beings. We do need our senses, and we do need our ability to process our emotional self and relationships and life itself. But if there is an emotional attachment that is almost creating a destructive behavior unconsciously towards self, and preventing even joy and happiness and fulfillment within oneself, then there definitely needs to be an exploration into the unconscious of what is being held on to, that also can be perpetuating maybe an addictive state to sadness or to emotional turmoil. And emotions, when we find ourselves in emotional turmoil of any kind, if it's anger, if it is sadness, if it is grief, it can be very addictive. I've talked about this before. If you're familiar with even Joe Dispenza's work, he talks about it as well. It's our biological response towards our emotional state of being. And when we are in our emotions, in intensity of emotions, it can become very addictive unconsciously. So this is going to require, again, self-awareness, looking at what are the attachments and feeling into the emotions. We are very disconnected in our modern society from our emotional self. This is a byproduct of society, is a byproduct of how we were raised. This is now, in this work, is a practice of returning into our emotional self and into our intuition and into our heart, and understanding our connection with our emotions and how we can work with our emotions to sense more about ourselves, interpersonal relationships, life itself, and also heal our heart. So we can heal ourselves completely. We can sense deeply when we are going through emotional difficulties, when we are in grief, when we are in sadness, when we are in pain. That is when we can sense the most. But we also have to be very aware of how much we are giving into that state of being. So it's going to require a lot of adjustment and a great deal of self-awareness to wiggle oneself out of being caught in grief continuously, or even being triggered to go downward spiral into a state of grief. And so this can come in very unconsciously if we have not resolved any attachments or emotional wounds of the past. The final one is fear. I saved this one for last because I do feel that fear is at the base of all of this. Even though Dr. Michael Lincoln has mentioned fear as a separate experience, I do feel that fear is truly at the foundation of it all. So if you even look at anger, for example, connected with fear, if we let go of anger and if we trust, we also may be fearful of what might happen, because if we're used to reacting a certain way or becoming angry and justifying our actions, well, if we let go of that, then what do we have to work with? It may create fear of letting go, fear of acting differently, fear of reacting, fear of maybe not trying to prove a point, what's going to happen, fear of actually being whole within ourselves, right? And that can create a lot of fear. Even identifying our true, amazing, unconditional, limitless self can create fear, because we are accessing something that we haven't felt before in this lifetime, and maybe even in many lifetimes, right? And returning to who we are can bring up a lot of fear. Stepping into our greatness can bring up a lot of fear. Stepping into the unknown can trigger fear. I've recorded a video on different types of fear. I suggest you watch that, because there are many different types of fear. Even looking at shame, the fear of being seen, the fear of judgment, the fear of worst case scenario, of being flawed, of having people look and judge us a certain way. So I feel fear is at the base of a lot of these, and fear does have a life of its own. Fear can manifest in many unconscious ways. It can sabotage our success. It can sabotage love. It can sabotage our health. It can alter our reality. It can shift our perceptions. We can distort the way that we see life and how we feel about life and relationships and ourselves. Fear is a very, very, very powerful and strong difficult challenge that we have within ourselves to overcome. Fear can also create a very strong barrier, preventing us from looking into our deeper self. Fear of the unknown, fear of what we might find, fear of even something better. So fear can perpetuate many unconscious actions, reactions, and barriers to deeper work. So fear is going to be one of the bigger ones to wrestle. It's going to be one of the bigger aspects to identify and to feel and to sense. And I feel that understanding fear is going to require all of your senses. It's going to require your deep inner sense of self. It's going to require self-awareness of your behaviors, your motivations. Are there any excuses? Are there any stories? Are there any narratives that have been formed from fear? Is there self-sabotage from fear? Are you wanting to step into something greater, into a new experience, a new relationship, a new career path, a greater sense of self? What are the barriers that are getting in the way? Could very well come from fear. We can also be afraid of our true potential and success, right? So this one is going to require deep work, looking at the patterns, looking at your family patterns, looking at societal patterns. How did your family feel about success, about love? How do they act around pertaining to love, relationships, success, life itself? Was there a lot of fear? No, fear comes from history. We all have fear within ourselves, and it is very much part of the collective unconscious and collective shadow. Now, the collective shadow can be in the physical realm. It can be associating with people or life dynamics that resemble our unconscious, our shadow self, our fears, or it can be part of the fear that is unconsciously perpetuating in society. Now, when we identify fear within ourselves, we can set ourselves free, and then we are going to rise into a whole new experience, because fear is one of the greatest limiters from our state of 5D consciousness and unconditional love. Fear can also manifest within the body, creating great heaviness and resistance. So pay attention. Where do you feel heavy? Where do you feel that you are resisting? Where do you feel that you're wanting to get ahead, but you're almost feeling like you're up against a wall? That is fear. Right? So I do suggest watching my video on fear, because that's going to open up a whole new avenue of the different types of fear. And we can reverse all of this. It does require, as I mentioned, a great deal of self-awareness, identifying the patterns, looking within and observing yourself through a new lens. With fear, you may also want to look at what you are most excited about. What kind of life do you want? Even detaching completely from the madness of the world and more focusing on yourself, so that you can identify the kind of life you want without the noise, because there is a lot of noise going on right now. And focus on yourself and get very granular with how you are feeling, identifying the patterns, identifying the blocks and resistance to life, identifying what's happening within your body that's showing up when you are about to step into something great, when you are about to maybe embark on a new path in life, or maybe a new relationship. What's coming up for you? Identify it, see it, let it go. And most importantly, you can also find the origin of it. How were you treated maybe as a child? What did you see in your formative years? What were the behavioral patterns of your parents, and so on and so on? So connecting the dots with what you observed, because it becomes ingrained within ourself, within our psyche, and becomes part of our belief system. But like I said earlier, your unconscious biocomputer is completely programmable, and reprogrammable, I should say. You can completely reprogram and program your unconscious self, your unconscious beliefs, how you react, how you behave, how you choose to navigate through life. First of all, it's important to know how you want to feel, how you want to behave, or how you want to act and react and maneuver through life and through relationships. How do you want that to be? How do you want to feel when dealing with difficult situations? Or do you want to rise above difficult situations and not deal with them anymore? Because that is possible with this work. What kind of life do you want? What kind of relationship do you want? How do you want to feel in your future reality? Start there and then work your way backwards. Well, what's getting in the way? What is getting in the way of feeling that feeling? What is getting in the way of being that person? What is getting in the way of accomplishing those goals? And then you'll be able to identify the fears that reside within the unconscious. Some of the unconscious patterns that may show up that will create resistance to this work will be avoidance, numbing out, disassociation, self-sabotage, fatigue, even preventing oneself from doing work or maybe getting up and having a busy, productive day. There may be many different mechanisms within the unconscious that can show up and create some kind of sabotage or resistance to progress. And of course, if you are looking to deepening your practice with this work, understanding your unconscious patterns, understanding your shadow, understanding the false beliefs, and working on shining light on these aspects within yourself and reprogramming your unconscious self, I do have the Shadow Project, where I touch on all of these aspects and more in a very micro approach and in a module-based approach to break down all of these aspects within ourselves or within yourself so that you can shine light on the unseen, so you can see parts of yourself that you hadn't seen before. And then, of course, work on creating that life that you are meant to have and returning to full authenticity, unconditional love, and your true potential. So the Shadow Project is available. I will leave a link below, of course, and I look forward to seeing you there. I hope this offered you some guidance on your path forward, and all the best.